My name is Layla Al-Rashid, and I was 20 years old on the night my father signed the treaty that sealed my fate. It was September 12th, 2021, a date carved into my memory like a blade pressed into stone. I remember standing at the intersection of 3 long marble corridors, each one leading to a different palace wing, each one belonging to a different prince. 3 doors, 3 men, 3 owners. And I was the offering handed to them in exchange for political stability. The air inside the royal compound that night felt heavy, thick with incense and unspoken decisions. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint echo of the ceremonial drums, the murmur of dignitaries in gold-trimmed robes, and the distant clatter of armored boots marching in rhythm. But inside me, everything was silent, so silent it scared me. My heartbeat had shrunk into a small, trembling thing, hiding somewhere deep like a frightened animal. When the guards escorted me forward, I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching a young woman dressed in embroidered silk walk toward a life she never chose. Have you ever faced a moment where every step you took pulled you further away from who you really were? That night, every step felt like betrayal of the girl I once hoped to be, betrayal of the dreams I used to whisper into the stars. As I approached the first door, its metal crest glinted under the chandelier light, the symbol of the kingdom's military power. Behind it waited the eldest prince, cold, disciplined, and feared. The second door bore the sigil of religious authority, a world of rigid rules and suffocating expectations. The third was marked with the insignia of wealth and economics, a kingdom built on numbers, negotiations, and ownership. Ownership. That word clung to me like smoke. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, though I kept them hidden beneath the folds of my gown. The hall smelled of rosewater and tension. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw my way out of the destiny chosen for me. But I stood still, trained from childhood to remain composed even when my soul was collapsing. Then came the moment I will never forget, the moment that shattered whatever was left of my innocence. Earlier that day, I had felt a strange heaviness in my body, a dizziness I tried to ignore. A whisper of fear had followed me throughout the ceremony. And after I stole away to my private chamber, away from the noise and the gold and the suffocating traditions, the truth stared back at me from a small strip in my trembling hand. I was pregnant, and I did not know who the father was. The walls closed in, the air vanished. My knees nearly buckled as the realization wrapped around my throat like an iron grip. How does a woman carry a child whose father is a question mark created by political ownership? How does she breathe knowing the world will demand answers she doesn't have? I thought that night would be the end of my life, but I was wrong. It became the night Jesus stepped into my story. I was born behind palace walls that most people only see in fairy tales, gleaming marble courtyards, fountains carved from onyx, gardens manicured by teams of silent workers, and chandeliers dripping with crystals that sparkled like frozen stars. But for me, the palace was never a dream. It was a beautifully polished cage. From the moment I learned to speak, I learned that my voice mattered only when it served a purpose. And from the moment I learned to walk, I learned that every step would be watched. My childhood was shaped by surveillance, subtle, constant, suffocating. Guards followed me like shadows stitched to my heels. Cameras hung in every corner like unblinking eyes. Even when I played alone in the courtyard, drawing shapes in the sand, there were always footsteps behind me. I was never truly alone. I was never truly free. My father used to tell me that I was born for the good of the kingdom, as though my existence were a strategic investment. I don't think he meant to be cruel. In his world, duty and power were the only languages people spoke. But to a little girl who wanted nothing more than to run outside the palace gates, His words felt like invisible chains tightening around my wrists. The only warmth I knew came from my mother. She had a quiet softness that contrasted sharply with the world we lived in. She taught me how to read poetry, how to dream with my eyes open, how to believe that gentleness was not weakness. But she died when I was 14, and the last thing she whispered to me, her voice trembling like a candle's final flame, was, "Layla, one day you will face something impossible, but you will not face it alone." At the time, I didn't understand her words. I only knew that the only person who loved me without conditions was gone. After she died, the palace grew colder. My room felt too big. My steps echoed too loudly. I spent most of my days hiding in the library, losing myself in novels that described lives I would never live, girls who ran into the ocean at dawn, women who traveled the world, people who chose their own futures. I clung to those stories like lifelines, even when the royal tutors scolded me for wasting time on fiction. Then, when I was 17, something unexpected happened, something that changed everything. It was a quiet winter afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the air hangs still and the world feels half asleep. I had slipped out to the western garden with a stack of books pressed to my chest, eager for a moment of privacy. As I turned a corner near the old olive tree, the books slipped from my arms and scattered across the stone path. Before I could bend down, someone knelt beside me. "Let me help you," a voice said, gentle, warm, unafraid. I looked up and saw a young man wearing the uniform of the Royal Transportation Staff. He had deep brown eyes and a shy smile that tugged at something in me I didn't recognize. "I'm Samir," he said, handing me the top book. "My father drives for the king." I should have stood and walked away. Princesses did not speak to staff. Royal women did not linger in gardens with men who had no titles. But something about him felt safe, safer than any guard, safer than any prince, safer than the cold, glittering halls I called home. "Do you like reading?" I asked before I could stop myself. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. "I read whatever books I can find. It's my way of escaping a world that's bigger than me." I felt a strange ache bloom in my chest. I read for the same reason. That was the beginning. We never planned our meetings, but they kept happening. A glance in the hallway, a shared moment in the library, a brief conversation in the garden while the guards were distracted. He never overstepped, never touched me, never even addressed me as princess unless someone else was nearby. But in his presence, I felt seen not as a political asset, not as a royal daughter, but as a person. One afternoon, while we sat on opposite sides of a rose bush to avoid being noticed, he said something I still remember clearly. "If I had a title, if I were someone who mattered, I would ask for your hand. But I'm just me." My heartbeat stumbled. Something inside me opened and bloomed like the roses between us. Have you ever encountered someone who awakened a version of you that you didn't know existed? Samir was that person for me. Of course, love born in shadows cannot stay hidden forever. The day everything shattered began innocently enough. We were talking beneath the shade of a date palm tree when one of my father's security officers saw us. He didn't hear our words. He didn't need to. My eyes betrayed everything. The next morning, Samir vanished. I was summoned to my father's private chamber, a place that smelled of incense and authority. He threw a photograph onto the table, a picture of me and Samir standing too close. His voice was ice. "Do you think you can shame this family? Do you imagine you're free?" I tried to speak, but he silenced me with a raised hand. "Your freedom ends now." That night, Samir was expelled from the palace grounds without a car, without money, without a chance to say goodbye, and I was locked in my chamber for 4 days. When my father finally let me out, he delivered the sentence that destroyed the last piece of my youth. You will marry 3 princes. Together they will unify the kingdom. This is your duty. Duty, that cursed word again. I felt something quietly break inside me, like a bird's wings crushed in a fist. And from that moment, my life was no longer my own. Life as the shared wife of 3 princes felt less like marriage and more like a dismantling, a slow, methodical breaking of my identity until I no longer recognized the girl who once hid behind rose bushes to exchange whispered dreams with Samir. Everything that connected me to who I truly was had been stripped away the moment my father sealed the alliance. But the true unraveling began the day I entered the first palace wing. The eldest prince, Malik, ruled the military sector of the kingdom with an iron will that left even seasoned generals trembling. His palace wing reflected him perfectly. Sharp edges, cold floors, spotless order. Every vase, every tapestry, every candle was placed with military precision. The servants walked as if marching in formation, and everyone spoke in low, clipped tones, afraid that a breath too loud might offend him. From the moment I arrived, he imposed a strict schedule. Wake at 5, pray at 5:30, stand perfectly still during morning briefings, even if my legs trembled, eat silently, move silently, breathe silently. For 2 days each week, my life became a regiment of discipline, stripped of softness and color. Malik didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His expectations were a weapon sharper than any blade. A single raised eyebrow could unravel my nerves for hours. Strength is the only virtue worth possessing, he told me one morning as I struggled to maintain posture under the weight of exhaustion. Weakness in a royal wife is a liability. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, I nodded, because nodding was the only safe response. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, I crossed the hallway into a different kind of prison. Prince Harun, the second brother, held religious authority and wielded it like a chain. His palace was dimly lit, covered in embroidered verses and heavy curtains that swallowed sunlight. The atmosphere pressed on my chest like a physical burden. Harun believed devoutness meant control. He ordered me to cover myself completely, even inside private quarters. He forced me to memorize long religious texts, reciting them until my voice cracked. If I stumbled over a verse or mispronounced a word, he'd make me start again from the beginning. You must purify your mind, he would say, pacing behind me with deliberate slowness. A woman's thoughts are a doorway to corruption. You must keep them closed. I often wondered what he would say if he knew the thoughts. I truly carried the memories of Samir's gentle voice, the way he looked at me as if I were someone worth choosing. Those thoughts kept me alive, and they terrified me, because every day under Harun's gaze made me more certain he could sense them hiding inside me like contraband. Then came the final 2 days of the cycle, Friday and Saturday, when I belonged to Prince Karim, the youngest. Karim did not seek discipline or piety. He sought power. His palace wing smelled of expensive perfumes and deals sealed behind gold-plated doors. He surrounded himself with businessmen, foreign investors, and stacks of documents that meant more to him than human relationships. To Karim, I was a strategic asset, a symbol of unity between the 3 brothers. He paraded me in front of diplomats, introduced me as our shared wife, and smiled as if the arrangement were a luxury instead of a humiliation. You will sit here, he instructed during one economic summit, pointing to a chair beside the negotiating table. Silence is your contribution. Your presence alone raises our influence. He wanted me present but invisible, seen but never heard. During those meetings, I learned what it felt like to be a piece of furniture polished, positioned, and utterly powerless. Every Sunday, the transition day arrived. Servants packed my things into boxes. Guards escorted me through hallways that never felt like mine. I slept in a different bed every 2 nights, wore different jewelry, ate according to different customs. My identity fractured like glass under repeated pressure. By the end of each week, I no longer knew who I was supposed to be. A soldier, a nun, a trophy? Have you ever felt as if you were living 3 different lives and belonging to none of them? The rotation system wasn't just exhausting, it was erasing me. Yet through it all, there was a deeper wound that throbbed beneath the surface. Samir's absence. His disappearance haunted me more than any prince's demands. What had happened to him after my father expelled him? Did he have food? Shelter? Was he hurt? Or worse, did he believe I had abandoned him? The thought tormented me. One night, while lying in Malik's rigid military bed, I clutched the memory of Samir like a lifeline. I replayed his smile, his soft-spoken dreams, the way he looked at me as if I were human. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way the guards dragged him away. I saw my father's expression, disgust mixed with fury, and I heard his words echo over and over. Your freedom ends now. The truth was unbearable. Samir suffered because of me, because I failed to hide my feelings, because for one moment I had tasted something close to love, and the kingdom had deemed it unacceptable. Weeks passed, then months, and I learned to endure my roles the way prisoners learn to endure chains. I stayed quiet, I obeyed, I survived, but inside, I was crumbling. The final blow came the day Karim summoned me to his office. The atmosphere was thick with cigar smoke and tension. A new treaty lay on the table, one that required my cooperation. Karim stared at me with eyes that saw numbers instead of people. This alliance will stabilize the region, he said. Your compliance ensures success. Remember, Layla, your life has always belonged to the kingdom. My life, belonging to the kingdom, not to God, not even to myself. It was then I realized something terrifying. My greatest fear wasn't the princes, or the rotation system, or even my father. My greatest fear was that the girl Samir loved, the girl who once dreamed freely, was disappearing forever, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The breaking point didn't arrive suddenly like a lightning strike. It came slowly, whispering at first, then tightening around me like a noose. It began with a tremor in my hands, a dizziness I couldn't explain, and a heaviness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. For weeks, I ignored it, convincing myself it was exhaustion from living 3 different lives. But one morning, while sitting in Harun's dimly lit palace wing, reciting a passage for the 100th time, the room spun violently. I excused myself, nearly collapsing as I stumbled into a private washroom. My hands trembled as I reached for the small test I had hidden beneath layers of fabric in my robe. A test I never imagined I would need. A test I prayed would prove my fear wrong. But when the 2 lines appeared clear, undeniable, I felt my entire world fracture. I stared at the result for what felt like an eternity, pregnant. The word was heavier than any command the princes had ever thrown at me. A child should be a blessing, a miracle. But in my world, it was a scandal wrapped in shame. Because I didn't know who the father was. How could I? I'd been divided between 3 men like a territorial map. I clutched the sink, fighting for air. My reflection blurred through my tears, and for the first time, I didn't even recognize the girl staring back. She looked hollow, like someone carved from glass, fragile, reflective, and moments away from shattering. When the princes found out, everything collapsed. Malik's jaw tightened as he eyed my stomach with military suspicion. "We will conduct DNA tests immediately after the birth," he declared. "We cannot risk uncertainty in the bloodline." Harun didn't even dignify my existence with a look. He simply whispered, "Unclean," as if the child inside me were a mark of impurity. Karim shrugged, calculating. "The child will belong to the council. Its value will depend on who the father is." Their words weren't daggers. They were sledgehammers, crushing whatever remained of my humanity. I realized then that I could lose my identity, my freedom, my dreams, but to lose the dignity of motherhood was the final blow. My child wasn't a life to them. It was property. That night, I curled into myself on the bed in Malik's wing, hands pressed to my stomach as if trying to shield the tiny heartbeat inside me. Silent sobs racked me. And in the silence, one question kept echoing through my mind, louder than the others. How can a mother love a child when the world demands she feel ashamed of it? The pain sharpened into another ache, one buried deeper. The ache of Samir, the man who taught me what tenderness felt like, the man who looked at me as if I mattered. I wondered what he would say if he knew. I wondered if he would have held my face between his hands and told me I wasn't dirty, I wasn't ruined, I wasn't hopeless. But Samir was gone, banished, punished for caring about me. I pressed my forehead against the cold window pane and whispered his name into the darkness, as if somehow the night wind could carry it to wherever he was. Samir. The word broke inside my mouth. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My voice cracked as if something inside me finally snapped. Have you ever reached a point where the thought of living another day felt heavier than the thought of disappearing? The next evening, I made my decision. I walked toward the forbidden garden, the one the guards rarely patrolled because it lay outside the main surveillance grid. It was the only place in the palace that still felt untouched by the cold machinery of power. The moon hung low, casting silver shards across the water of the lake. My footsteps were soundless on the marble path. I held the small knife beneath my cloak, its weight both terrifying and strangely comforting. The air was cool, but sweat trickled down my back. My heart beat in uneven bursts, like a bird trapped inside a cage too small for its wings. Standing at the edge of the lake, I closed my eyes. For a moment, the world was still, completely, devastatingly still. Then I whispered the words I never dared speak aloud. "God, if you are real, where are you?" My voice trembled between desperation and surrender. The night swallowed my question, offering no answer. And with my final breath held tight in my throat, I raised the blade. At that moment, I truly believed my story was ending. But heaven was closer than I knew. Just as the blade trembled in my hand, a soft gasp broke the silence. I spun around, startled, my breath caught in my chest. Standing a few feet behind me was Maria, the Filipino maid who worked in the palace laundry room. She was small and gentle-looking, always moving quietly through the corridors like a shadow people rarely noticed. But in that moment, she felt like a sudden beam of light cutting through darkness. Her eyes widened when she saw the knife. "Miss Layla, no, please," she whispered, her voice cracking as she stepped toward me with trembling hands. "Please don't do this." For a moment, I could only stare at her, confused, ashamed, exposed. "Leave," I muttered, turning away. "You don't understand." But Maria didn't move. "I do understand," she said softly, "more than you think." I felt anger rise in me, not at her, but at the unbearable pain pressing on every part of my soul. "You have no idea what my life is," I snapped. "You don't know what it feels like to be owned, to be divided between men, to lose the only person you ever loved. You don't know what it feels like to carry a child that the world calls shame. Maria swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. I may not know your exact pain, she whispered, but I know what it is to feel trapped. I know what it is to feel like no one sees you. Her words softened something inside me, just enough for her to take one small step closer. Please, she said, wipe your tears. I brought something for you. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a tiny folded paper, worn at the edges, creased like it had been hidden many times. She held it out to me with hands that shook. I couldn't sleep, she said. I felt God telling me to give this to you. I hesitated, staring at the fragile piece of paper as if it were a foreign object. Slowly, I took it from her. My fingertips brushed the surface. It felt soft, almost warm, like it had been held many nights, maybe soaked in tears before. I unfolded it carefully. On the inside, written in delicate handwriting, was a single Bible verse. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. The words hit me like a physical force. Redeemed, called by name, mine. My throat tightened, my vision blurred. A strange warmth flickered in my chest, small but undeniable. No one had called me mine in a way that didn't mean ownership. No one had called me by name in a way that felt like love. Why? Why did you give me this? I whispered, struggling to steady my voice. Maria's answer came with a trembling certainty. Because Jesus loves you, Miss Layla. He sees your pain. He knows the burdens you carry, and he does not see you as property. My breath caught. Jesus? She nodded quickly, eyes darting nervously at the shadows. I am a Christian, quietly, secretly. We have to be careful here. But I pray for people in this palace every night. And last night, I prayed for you. I felt God telling me, give her my word. I held the small paper to my chest, unable to stop the tears from falling. Why would God care about me? I whispered. Maria stepped closer, lowering her voice to a reverent whisper. Because he made you. Because you are his daughter. Because he has not forgotten you. Her words wrapped around my broken pieces like a soft cloth, pressing against an open wound, tender but painful in their gentleness. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. Small, fragile, but alive. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in the darkness after all. I didn't sleep the night Maria gave me the paper. I couldn't. The verse pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. I have called you by name. You are mine. Those words wrapped around me long after I returned to my room, long after the palace grew silent, long after the rest of the world slipped into dreams I could never reach. I sat on the cold floor beside my bed, unable to stop staring at the fragile slip of paper. Everything around me felt muted, as if the world were holding its breath. But inside me, something unfamiliar stirred, something warm, something alive. I pressed my palm to my stomach, feeling the faintest flutter beneath my fingers. Who will protect you? I whispered to the life growing inside me. Who will protect me? There was no answer. Only the hum of the palace generators and the faint rustle of curtains shifting in the night wind. Hours passed. The moon drifted across the sky. Still, sleep refused to come. And then, just as dawn threatened the horizon, I felt a sudden electric stillness. The air changed. It thickened with a presence I could not explain. The hairs on my arms rose, and my breath caught in my throat. The room, which had been shrouded in darkness moments before, began to glow. But it wasn't the glow of lamps. It wasn't moonlight. It wasn't anything human. It was a light that felt alive, a light that carried warmth not from heat, but from love, love so overwhelming it made my chest tighten. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The light grew brighter, filling every corner of the room, yet it didn't blind me. Instead, it soothed me. It wrapped around me like arms I couldn't see. My heart pounded in my ears. What is happening?" I whispered. And then I saw him. A figure stepped forward within the light, human yet divine, gentle yet powerful beyond anything I'd ever felt. His face shone with compassion, and his eyes looked at me the way Samir used to, but deeper, far deeper, as if he knew every wound I carried, every fear I hid, every tear I had ever cried. He lifted his hands, and I saw them, the scars, the unmistakable marks on his wrists, glowing softly in the light. My breath shattered. I knew, somehow, without anyone ever teaching me, I knew exactly who he was. "Jesus," I breathed, my voice cracking. Is it really you?" His voice, when it came, was like nothing earth has ever known, gentle as a whisper, powerful as thunder, warm as sunlight on cold skin. It resonated not only in my ears, but in my soul. "Layla," he said, calling me by name. "Beloved one, I have been with you through every moment of your suffering." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I covered my mouth with shaking hands. I wasn't sure whether to kneel or run or collapse. My legs trembled beneath me, but I couldn't look away. He stepped closer, and the light followed him like a living halo. "You were never invisible to me," he said. "Not in the palace, not in the gardens, not in your pain. I saw every tear, I heard every cry. I carried every moment you thought you walked alone." My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor, not because he demanded it, but because my strength melted under the weight of his presence. I felt small and known, broken and held, terrified and comforted all at once. "But why me?" I sobbed. "Why would you come here? I'm nothing. I'm trapped. I'm ruined. He raised one hand, and the room fell utterly silent. "You are mine," he said softly. "Not as property, not as possession, but as my daughter." The words pierced me deeper than any wound. They split the darkness inside me and filled it with warmth that radiated through my bones. I pressed my hand to my chest, overwhelmed by the flood of emotion. "I saw you the night you thought of ending your life," he continued. "I stood with you by the lake. I whispered to your heart even when you felt only silence." I inhaled sharply. "Then why didn't you stop me?" His eyes softened. "Because love is not force, child. It is invitation. And tonight, you finally turned your heart toward me." The light around him pulsed like a heartbeat. "Layla," he said, "you were never meant to be owned by men. You were never meant to live in chains. Your worth is not determined by a treaty or a title. Your identity is not defined by the wounds inflicted upon you." He knelt, the King of Kings, and placed a hand over my trembling one. "You are my beloved, and your story is not over." Something inside me broke, something cold, something dead, and in its place, warmth surged, filling the empty spaces of my soul. "Jesus, please," I whispered, "save me." He smiled the most gentle, radiant smile I've ever seen. "I already have." The light enveloped me, flooding through every crack in my heart, binding wounds I thought would never heal. And in that moment, I knew I had just met the one my soul had been crying for all my life. In the days that followed my encounter with Jesus, Something inside me shifted so profoundly that even the oppressive palace walls felt different. The fear that once ruled me began to loosen its grip. For the first time in my life, I felt watched over, not by guards, not by cameras, not by princes, but by someone whose gaze carried love instead of control. Still, I knew I couldn't stay. Not in that palace, not under 3 men who would claim ownership of my child, not under a father who saw my existence as a political asset. Jesus had awakened something in me, a freedom I could feel beneath my skin, and that freedom could not survive within these walls. But escape? It felt impossible. The palace was a fortress. Cameras on every corner, guards at every entry, sensors on every door. No one left without authorization, and no one disappeared without being hunted. Yet, the night after Jesus appeared, I had a dream. I dreamt of a delivery truck, white, with a small blue symbol painted on the back door. I dreamt of a guardhouse empty, a security monitor frozen, a fire alarm ringing in the distance. And in the dream, I ran. I didn't know where, only that I was running toward freedom. When I woke up, my heart pounded with certainty. It wasn't just a dream. It was instruction. I found Maria in the laundry wing, folding sheets in her quiet, careful way. When she looked up at me, her eyes softened as if she already knew what I would say. "I need to leave," I whispered. "Tonight." She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She simply nodded, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "I've prayed for this day," she breathed. "There is a network, believers, hiding in the city. We help women like you. But it will be dangerous, Miss Layla. Very dangerous." "I know," I said, "but Jesus told me my story isn't over. I have to trust him." Maria's faith steadied mine. She guided me through back corridors, teaching me the patterns of the guards, the blind spots between surveillance angles, the timing of patrol shifts. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm, held, protected. When night finally fell, I wrapped a dark cloak around myself and followed Maria through service tunnels that smelled of metal and dust. My heart raced with every echoing footstep. If we were caught, the punishment would be severe. But as we neared the outer gates, something unbelievable happened. The security cameras, usually humming with red blinking lights, were frozen, completely still. Maria covered her mouth with both hands. "Oh my Lord, the system is down." "It's not just down," I whispered. "It's paused, just like in my dream." We hurried to the guardhouse, expecting the usual cluster of soldiers. But it was empty, every chair abandoned, every radio left crackling. And then we heard it, a distant alarm ringing from the east wing of the palace. "A fire," Maria whispered. "They must have all been called there." My dream was unfolding exactly as I had seen it. We ran across the deserted courtyard. The night air felt different, not cold, but sharp, alive, like heaven itself was parting a path for us. When we reached the servant gate at the back, a delivery truck was parked there, white, with a blue symbol painted on the back door. My breath caught. "This is the truck," I whispered, "from my dream." As if on cue, the driver stepped out, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the subtle cross necklace of a secret believer. "Are you Layla?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Get in, quickly." Maria squeezed my hands with trembling urgency. "Go with God," she whispered. "He is with you, always." I climbed into the back of the truck. The door shut. Darkness enveloped me, and for the first time since childhood, I felt safe. We drove for hours, weaving through back streets toward the outskirts of the city, until finally the truck stopped beside an old warehouse. The driver tapped gently. "You're safe. Come." When I stepped out, two women rushed toward me. One carried blankets, the other supported my arm when I swayed. Both whispered prayers under their breath. They led me down a flight of stairs into an underground church hidden beneath crates and supply shelves. A small cross hung crookedly on the wall. Dozens of candles flickered, filling the space with soft warmth. "This is where we help women who escape," the pastor whispered. "You're safe here, daughter." I didn't realize how exhausted I was until my body gave out. They laid me on a mattress, and only then did the first contraction hit. Fear surged through me, sharp, overwhelming, but the pastor knelt beside me, praying in a quiet, steady voice. "You're not alone," he said. "Jesus is here." Hours passed in waves of pain and prayer until finally, with one last cry, a tiny voice filled the room, a sound so pure it felt like light. "My daughter." They placed her in my arms, small, warm, perfect. Tears blurred my vision as I traced her tiny fingers, her soft cheeks, her trembling lips. "What will you name her?" the pastor asked gently. I held her close, whispering through tears. "Nadia." It means protected by God. And in that moment, with my child against my heart and the gentle glow of candles around us, I knew the truth. Jesus had not only saved my life, he had saved hers. The first morning outside the palace felt unreal, too quiet, too gentle, too free. I woke up in the basement church with my daughter sleeping on my chest, her tiny breaths warm against my skin. For years, I had lived under chandeliers worth more than entire villages, surrounded by walls dripping in gold. Yet nothing in that world had ever felt as precious as the dim, candlelit room where I now lay. Nothing had ever felt as holy as the fragile life I held in my arms. The believers in the underground community welcomed me as though I were family. They brought warm tea, soft blankets, and whispered blessings over my newborn child. They didn't ask for my title, my lineage, or the details of my shame. They simply saw me, Layla, a woman who had survived, a woman who needed healing, a woman loved by Jesus. One of the older women, Miriam, took my hands in hers one evening and said, "You lost a kingdom, child, but you gained a home." And she was right. The palace had offered me marble floors, silk gowns, and suffocating expectations. But here, among people who worshipped in whispers and hid their faith like treasure, I discovered something far more valuable. Peace. Not the fragile peace that shatters under the weight of power, but the kind that settles deep inside, steady and warm, like a shelter in a storm. For the first time in my life, I felt safe to breathe, safe to rest, safe to hope. Days turned into weeks, and I began to help around the church, folding clothes, preparing food, tending to women who arrived bruised, frightened, or broken. Many of them had stories like mine. Marriages forced upon them, families who treated them as bargaining chips, men who believed women existed for control. When I listened to their trembling voices, something stirred inside me, a sense of purpose I never knew I was allowed to have. I would hold their hands and say, "You are not worthless. You are not invisible. Jesus sees you. Jesus loves you." And when their tears fell, I felt my own wounds beginning to heal. Sometimes, late at night, when the others were asleep, I would sit alone with Nadia resting against my heartbeat and think of the girl I once was, the girl who wandered the palace gardens dreaming of freedom, the girl who clung to Samir's gentle words, the girl who nearly ended her life beside a silent lake. I no longer grieve that girl, because she led me here, to a life I never imagined possible. Yes, I lost my title. I lost the wealth. I lost the illusion of royal security. I lost the version of myself shaped by fear. but I gained something far greater. I gained a savior who called me daughter. I gained a child whose name means protected by God. I gained a community who loved without condition. I gained my true identity, not as a princess of a fragile kingdom, but as a child of the King of Heaven. Even now, whenever I look at Nadia, her tiny fingers curling around mine, I feel the overwhelming truth wash over me again and again. I am free, truly free, not because of anything I did, but because Jesus stepped into a palace soaked in silence and shattered its darkness with his light. And if he could rescue someone like me, someone trapped, owned, silenced, and broken, then he can rescue you too. Maybe you feel lost right now. Maybe you feel invisible. Maybe you're carrying shame no one knows about. Maybe you're standing at the edge of your own lake, wondering if your story still matters. Let me tell you this with all the love in my heart. Jesus sees you. Jesus knows your name. Jesus has not forgotten you, and your story is not over. If you need prayer, if you need someone to stand with you, write in the comments where you're watching from. I will read them, and this community will pray for you. You don't have to walk through your shadows alone. And if my story touched your heart, subscribe to hear more testimonies of what Jesus is still doing today. Because miracles didn't end in ancient times. I am living proof.